Hello, I'm Michael Serapio, and you are listening to The Bureau Chiefs, a primetime politics podcast from CPAC. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again, and joining us around the table at this moment in time, Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Mia Rabson, Ottawa Deputy Bureau Chief for the Canadian Press, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to all three of you.
Hello, Michael.
So listen, we start off this week with news that the Prime Minister will be heading down to Washington early next week. He's going to meet with Donald Trump. The PMO saying that the visit will focus on shared priorities like trade and security. Although, you know, we did hear from Dominic LeBlanc earlier this week, the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, and he seems to be telling us not to expect great news or big news anytime soon. Take a listen to what he told committee earlier this week, not about this trip to Washington, but about expectations around Canada-U.S. trade.
I learned the hard lesson of saying, I think we're going to have progress in the next 3 weeks. I think we might have a deal by August, or so I have lost the illusion that we should predict in precise time when we might get to an agreement. An agreement can take many different forms. My view is an agreement is something that would improve the circumstance that we're in today.
Okay, so a less than enthusiastic tone, I would say. What can we expect then from this trip coming up next week, Bob?
Well, first of all, they are right to be cautious because Donald Trump, you never know what he's going to do next. And they were even, we knew about the trip on Thursday evening, and they let us know on Friday morning. But even then, they were nervous about announcing it because he could change his mind and say, I don't want to meet with you anymore. I do think that the fact that the Prime Minister is going down for a working visit, that we're going to get an announcement of some kind. I think Dominic LeBlanc hinted at this in his testimony when he said, we're in the next couple of weeks we're going to talk about all the investment we're making in the United States. So, you know how this works with Donald Trump. Big and beautiful, baby. This is what he wants, right? So you've got to, we're going to bundle every kind of Canadian investment that's in the United States. And we're going to say, this is what Canada is doing, investing in the United States. We're going to have to pay some tariffs. Hopefully it's at 5 or 10%. I don't know what it's going to be. And there's going to be, obviously, a package involving national security and defense, issues like cybersecurity, AI, cutting-edge technology, that sort of stuff. So I think we're going to, one never knows, right, because you're dealing with Donald Trump. But I think overall we're going to get some kind of an agreement. And it's going to be something that Donald Trump is going to be able to say, see, we got what we wanted, and Mark Carney is going to zip his lip and let the president win.
Okay, listen, I'm going to pick up on that a bit, but quickly to you, Mia and Joël-Denis, what are your expectations for next week?
I mean, I wouldn't expect that this is the big deal to end all deals. I mean, even just this week, we saw that the United States is increasing tariffs again, this time on Canada's forest products. So we're not at the point yet where they're going to sign it all off and everyone's going to go home happy. I agree with Bob. The Prime Minister wouldn't be going to Washington if there wasn't something to do. This isn't, he, as we've heard many times, he has his cell phone. He can text him, they call, they have these calls that we just find out about after the fact. He's going for a reason. So he's going to make a big show of something. I think we have a budget coming up. There's a few announcements we're going to see ahead of that budget. This budget is a big defense budget, and the Americans obviously big on defense. It wouldn't surprise me if there is some kind of defense component to this announcement. But yeah, he's not going just to have a working meeting. There is going to be something put on the table from the Canadians.
Okay, Joël-Denis, care to guess what might be on the table?
Well, I expect something because politically speaking, you cannot go to see Donald Trump and come back from that meeting empty-handed, especially since the opposition parties have been increasing the pressure on the Prime Minister to get a deal with the United States. As Bob mentioned rightly, it's difficult to do any transaction with Donald Trump because he's unpredictable. And right now there is a situation in the United States, as you know, the budget shutdown that complicates maybe things. That's why they were so reluctant to announce it too fast, too quickly at that meeting. And also the fact that Mr. Carney is bringing 3 ministers, cabinet ministers, along with him. Mélanie Joly, the industry minister, Dominic LeBlanc, obviously the minister responsible for trade with the United States and Tanan, the foreign affairs minister. Maybe in some of those files there will be some advance, some new deals, but politically speaking, it's a must. Mr. Carney must come back from Washington with something, otherwise he would be wasting his time and facing accusations from the opposition that he's not up to the task to deal with Donald Trump.
Yeah, because that certainly is a criticism that we have been hearing since even before the return of Parliament. Although, I want to pick up on a point that Bob was making, this idea that Donald Trump is feeling good. Like, I mean, as much as, Canada would like to say that we've kind of had this elbows up strategy, Donald Trump is feeling good about the tariffs right now, so much so that he mentioned Canada and other countries and trade during his speech at Quantico on Tuesday to military leadership. Let's take a listen to Donald Trump from earlier this week.
It actually because they're having a hard time up there in Canada now because, as you know, with tariffs, everyone's coming into our country. We have more investment than we've ever had before, $17 trillion coming in. And they're coming in from Canada, Mexico, from Europe, from all over. AI, auto plants. Everybody's coming back to the United States.
Okay, so a bit of his speech, which, was part of a greater controversial speech given, but still, when it comes to the tariffs applied to other countries, the U.S. president is obviously feeling very good. Bob, what does that say about the elbows up strategy? Has that failed, or are we now moving on to a charm offensive instead?
Elbows up strategy was all about election. This has nothing to do with the reality of dealing with Donald Trump or any American president for that matter. And it worked for the Liberals, and Mr. Pierre Poilievre, is doing a very good job of rubbing it in the Prime Minister's nose, rightly so. But, we're the ones that fell for this, but we have to be realistic. We're in very serious trouble in this economy. We have to cut a deal with the president because we're seeing a lot of job losses, and we run the risk of a 10%. Right now, it's 7% unemployment rate. We run the risk of 10% unemployment, and so it's now Mr. Carney's term to be very humble. And even Jean Chrétien used to say, when you deal with the Americans, you got to let them make you win.
Okay, wisdom from the ages there. Mia, what does it say about elbows up and this charm offensive? Or I don't know if you were going to call it charm offensive, but a change in tact, if you will.
I'm not sure it's a charm offensive as much as Mr. Carney. This is also sort of something he's somewhat used to in terms of negotiating. He hasn't done it as a prime minister or as at a diplomatic level before, but negotiating business to business. And I think that's one of the things that he has done to establish a rapport with Donald Trump, is to say businessman to businessman. And so he's going down there. There's a lot of Canadians that are sort of waiting, but I think the Canadians have also moved on a little bit. So not just from elbows up, but also Trump and the tariffs aren't as high because they still are worried now about inflation and affordability. So Mark Carney has a domestic problem as well as a Donald Trump problem. So it's not a charm offensive as much as he's kind of getting now down to the nitty-gritty of actual negotiations. And again, I say he would not be going if he didn't have something to say or something to bring back to Canada, because he needs that both with Trump and he also needs it for the domestic audience.
And those domestic issues become exacerbated if you add on to it high unemployment and people, not struggling with affordability, but struggling with the basic needs if they lose their jobs.
And I expect Mr. Carney to come with some numbers also. I'm sure that his team and the department responsible for the trade relationship in the United States are crunching some numbers. As Bob mentioned, during the committee in the Senate, Mr. Leblanc mentioned that the Canada Pension Plan invests more in the United States than the European Union combined. So those numbers, I don't think Mr. Trump is aware of that. And Canada is about to spend a lot of money in defense. Maybe they're going to say we are, in the situation where we want to buy more armaments, more munitions, more tanks, more vehicles, and maybe some drones. So although we want to get away from the United States a bit, there's still some deals we can make in the United States. So if you bring that together, crunching numbers and defense spending that is coming up, respecting what the United States also wish that we do reach the 5%, and also access to critical minerals. This is a key point that Mr. Very key cards that Mr. Carney can play with the president, and he's aware that the United States need as much critical minerals. And wean off the dependency on China and Russia.
Yeah, and listen, I don't know if you want to say anything about this, but I will say that Donald Trump in that same speech in Quantico talked about the Golden Dome initiative as well and mentioned Canada. And in fact, he said, well, Canada can be the 51st state if they want in. But that could go to what you're talking about, Bob, in terms of investment into the United States.
And look, we've all seen this from the Japanese, from the Europeans, from the South Koreans, where they have these crazy investment things in the United States, but there's nothing signed. They're just taking everything they can and saying, well, this is what we're going to do, President Trump. And he says, see, look what we've done. I've got them to invest in the United States. But nothing is written down that there's any of these investments. So there's no reason why Canada couldn't do the same thing. Hey, we're going to have billions of dollars. But whether we actually ever will, I don't know, but but I think in Canada, to Canada's credit, because there's so much cross-border trade, and U.S. firms own a lot of the Canadian companies here, as well as companies in the United States, that I think the numbers can really go up if you talk about terms of investment. That could very well be the kind of thing that, well, I think it is the kind of thing that the president's going to like.
Okay, so keeping a very close eye, not surprisingly, on this trip coming up next week. But listen, let's switch topics here because without a doubt, pipeline politics re-entered the parlance this week. We had Danielle Smith essentially making an announcement that the province of Alberta will now be the major proponent behind a pipeline proposal, that they want Ottawa to designate a national project. We have also heard at the same time the BC Premier David Eby saying, listen, stop this. This is a distraction. There are far better, he says, far better shovel-ready projects, environmentally ready projects, and there is still, without the Alberta government, a serious proponent for a pipeline in this country. So I do wonder then, Bob, get you to start us out again, what type of problem does this create for the Prime Minister when obviously this is a big ticket item for Danielle Smith, and unlike Justin Trudeau, has not had to face the kind of difficulty that Trudeau had with Danielle Smith so far? It is
a difficult political problem for the Prime Minister, even though what Danielle Smith is proposing is not even on the drafting paper. I mean, she's only offering $14 million. Pipelines cost multi-billion dollars. $14 million is like the price of a couple of bolts on a pipeline, and but she's put them. And the other factor is that it's far more important for us to get these natural gas pipelines up and running. Because there's a heavy demand for LNG in Asia particularly, and secondly, the TMX Trans Mountain Pipeline is not fully operational yet. I think it's at 70% capacity. It's already bringing in a lot of money, but we don't necessarily need a second pipeline right now. But for political reasons, she's really hitting the gas on this, and a lot of oil companies have come up and said, we want you to lift the pipeline ban and to back this proposal. But none of these have said, well, we're going to come up to the plate and spend billions and billions of dollars. It does put the Prime Minister in a difficult situation. He's in a minority parliament. He doesn't really want to get into a fight with British Columbia. He's got a lot of environmentalists in the Liberal caucus. So there's a lot of political problems for him. I think he's going to try to do as much as possible to leave that sitting with the major projects office as long as possible as they study this.
Yeah, as they say, but we'll see how quickly it is, because Danielle Smith wants this to essentially break up a logjam to find a private player. But again, Mia, the political issue this creates for the Prime Minister, what would you say to that?
I mean, it's there's no doubt it's big. I mean, this is an age-old problem for the federal government, federal Liberals in particular. I mean, to Bob's point, this is a $14 million offer to make a proposal. Like, it's not even like it's backing the proposal exists. Like this, they don't have a route. It's at this point, it's kind of a pie in the sky idea for this pipeline. But she's definitely sort of lit the match. She's putting a lot of pressure on the federal government. She got something out of the Prime Minister. We know that in their meeting. She came out of that meeting so positive about the federal government. She got some sign from him that he was willing to open the door. And I think this is her sort of testing how far he's willing to go. There's also a lot of pressure coming from the Alberta government, the Conservatives, and the private sort of oil industry, fossil fuel sector, to get rid of some of the legislation they don't like. The emissions cap in Alberta, the tanker ban off of the coast of British Columbia. They don't want those policies. They want them gone. And this is sort of a test to see whether or not the Prime Minister is willing to move on some of those items. But, you know, it's the same hard place that the federal government finds itself in, sort of between an oil-producing province and other provinces that maybe don't want the pipeline.
And yet have access to the Pacific Coast, which Alberta needs.
Exactly.
It's quite remarkable. Let's go back a year ago. Building a pipeline was not part of the national conversation. Now it is part because of what happened in the United States and the pressure that is exercising the President Trump on Canada, threatening to annex us and putting us tariffs. But it has changed the national conversation, and I think Danielle Smith is using that change of to try to push that on the forefront for priorities of the federal government. But Mr. Carney, I think, has some way out of it. He can say, until such time as there is a private proponent involved in this, I cannot touch this. We have one pipeline that we built at a cost of $34 billion, and it's all fine right now. So he has a way out. And also, we have to take into consideration the opposition of the First Nations in British Columbia. That's also a major factor in the overall assessment of the project. So it's all fine and dandy to push it now. We know that Mr. Carney wants to announce I think, a list of projects every 4 months within the next 2 years. So Madam Smith is hoping that this will be eventually part of the new tranche of projects to announce, but that remains to be seen. The key element is the private sector that has to be involved, and so far we haven't seen it.
She's going to use this in her election campaign.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, this is all about, look, Ottawa's denying us this pipeline that is as you said, pie in the sky, which is always the way you win elections in Alberta, is you run against Ottawa.
Yeah, well, you know, I do wonder, because we've, you know, when we cover these stories, when we go to the First Minister's meetings, when we're speaking to people behind closed doors, you know, there seems to be this grand deal, right? Pipeline for carbon capture. Yep. Maybe it's carbon capture for emissions, rather not emissions, but regulation change or dropping regulations. Maybe that's the grand deal that we're going to see. Yeah, the grand bargain, exactly. So keeping an eye on that. And you mentioned the budget earlier on, Mia, and we're now, about 4 weeks away from this government's first budget. Already we heard from the Bloc Québécois. They say they're not going to support the government, even before anything is tabled. They're not going to support the government. This is a minority Liberal government, so this becomes a double-barreled question. Who will work with the Liberals to pass a budget? What is, because the flip side of it is, what's the appetite for an election right now, Bob?
Look, the Bloc Québécois could say they're going to vote against it, and undoubtedly they will, and I think the NDP will too. And whether the Conservatives do or not, but you know, we've all seen this before, when all of a sudden some members of Parliament just don't show up because they're very busy with their constituents. Love to have done that. Sorry, I got a flat tire on the way here, right?
Budget? What budget?
There's no way in the world that this budget is going to be defeated. It's just not. The NDP can't afford to do it. They don't even have a leader. The Bloc Québécois does not want to have an election right now either. They don't know whether they're going to, whether they would increase their vote or not. And the Conservatives, they haven't even. Mr. Poilievre is facing a leadership review. I just don't see it in the cards.
I mean, there's no appetite amongst Canadians for an election right now. I mean, the Prime Minister has an agenda to sort of respond to tariffs, and having another election in the midst of the economy the way it is, there is no appetite for that. So I mean, there's multiple different scenarios. People don't show up. You know, someone abstains. There's, you know, something in the budget that they offer for one of the parties to at least vote with them. I mean, I think it's worth noting that the Conservatives and the Bloc together don't have enough votes to defeat the Liberals. So if the NDP were to just abstain, for example, the budget would pass. So because the Liberal minority is so close to a majority, I think, they're 3 seats shy. It's not the situation we've had in some past minority governments where there has to be a bit more wheeling and dealing. They're really close. I think it's also noteworthy, though, that this is probably why we haven't seen any of those appointments. We've talked about some cabinet ministers and MPs, former cabinet ministers, and MPs, maybe to diplomatic posts. They need those votes right now.
Yeah, because despite the reports that the Prime Minister would like to put some key people in, they still have to run in a by-election. And to your point, if they vacate the seat, that reduces the seat count for the Liberals.
Yeah, the same scenario. I expect the opposition parties maybe to vote against the budget, but not in sufficient number to defeat the government. So they would make their point, we're against the budget, but wouldn't force an election on Canadians at a time when...
Do they want a Liberal majority government? Because that would be the end result. Because, you know, he's dealing with very serious issues in terms of Donald Trump, the economy, getting these resource projects underway. there's just no way that Canadians are going to be.
We went to the polls in April, so.
Yeah. Although, you know, we heard from the Conservatives saying they would be constructive with this Liberal government when they could agree, and would be critical when they could not agree. It does make me wonder about the Conservative vote. Is it an assumption that we can bet on that they are going to vote against the budget, or will they find reason to vote with the budget?
I mean,
I have no idea.
With all of the defense spending we're expecting in this budget, that might be enough for them to vote for it. I mean, I wouldn't assume any party is going to vote against it or for it at this point, because we haven't seen it. I mean, the Conservatives might be in a political tough spot as well, because if all of this defense spending they've been demanding happen for years and years is actually in the budget, you know, voting against that might not work well for them.
They're not going to like the deficit, though.
But they're not going to like the deficit. They're not going to want to support this government. So
that's the critical element. How big will be the deficit? I think that will be the major factor for the Conservative to vote against it or for it.
Yeah. Well, you know, and that is a number that we're going to keep a very close eye on when November 4 rolls around. We'll be in lockup, that glamorous term of a budget. So listen, thank you for that. Before we're done, we have a few things to check off on our agenda, beginning with yays and nays. Okay. Mr. Fife, we begin with you. Yays and nays of the week.
Well, I think the yay is the appointment of Doug Guzman, former RBC vice chair, to head the Defense Procurement Agency. It's been a long awaited change. That's finally we're going to cut through the delays in getting defense equipment for our armed force. I think that's a really good one. And you know, I think I'm still. My nay is still, I still do not think that Pierre Poilievre is acting like a responsible leader. He still seems to be doing a lot of stunts, and it's time for him to grow up.
Anything particular this week?
Well, he went after the Prime Minister, for example, on that he was over to Europe on the weekend, and that was misspending. And, you know, it's not misspending. Like, the Prime Minister has to go and meet world leaders because we are in a very serious situation with Donald Trump, and we've got to work with these European leaders, not only as a counterweight to Trump, but also in terms of trying to diversify our trade. That's one example.
Mia, yays and nays of the week?
I think yays, I'll sort of parallel Bob a little bit and say the defense procurement strategy or defense procurement office. I think this is something that Canada has needed for many years to try and streamline something that we have not been very good at, which is buying anything for the military. Obviously yet to be seen whether it does its job, but I think it's something that was promised and something that is sort of long overdue for Canada, especially as they're promising to sort of meet their NATO targets and in the world that we live in today. Nays, I'm going to go a little bit wider and say this ongoing fight about the ostrich farm in British Columbia. Because partly I'm just tired of hearing the word ostrich. You know, we haven't been able to get the leader of the opposition to say one way or the other what he supports. He's blaming it all on he calls liberal incompetence. But it's a problem that should not still be dragging out at this point. There should, you know, and it's sort of well overdue to come to a conclusion.
It's like they're burying their heads or something. Joël-Denis.
Well, my ace goes to the Speaker of the House of Commons, Francis Capalaja, because so far he's managed to keep the House in order, generally speaking. We're expecting the worst after the elections, and as Bob mentioned, Mr. Pierre Poilievre is still on leadership campaign. He wants to retain his position, and you could have expected more rowdiness in the House of Commons, and so far so good. And that's good for decorum, and I think also the kind of perception Canadians may have about their House of Commons, it's getting better. So Mr. Francis Capalaja gets my nay goes to the Environment Minister, Julie Dubrassin, for the following reason. She sent a letter to the opposition parties telling them that the government, because of cuts, will not pay for their travel and housing at the COP30 in Brazil. So it's a way to sort of punish opposition parties in a very immature way, if I may say. So that's my nay for the week.
Okay, and now time for the look ahead. Okay, so the stories you're going to be watching out for, I suspect we spoke about one very already. Bob, what's in the agenda?
Story next week, it's the Prime Minister meeting Donald Trump.
Yeah, it really does have the potential to determine the rest of the week, depending on what comes out on the Wednesday.
Well, and the thing is, with Donald Trump, you never know.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a risk, right? Going into that Oval Office, as we saw with the President Zelensky, it can sometimes go off the rails pretty quickly. So, yeah, absolutely. That's the only thing I'm really watching for next week.
It's the rendezvous of the week, as we say.
Okay. And I'm the only. You're not going to Washington. Okay, I'm the only one there, so I'll have to email you guys. It's like, boy, oh boy, do we have something to talk about. Listen, Robert Fife, Mia Rabson, Joël-Denis, Bellavance, thank you as always.
Thank you, Michael.
And that is the Bureau Chiefs for this week. Of course, you can tune into the Bureau Chiefs or pick it up wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Michael Serapio. Thank you for listening.